Why nobody can beat Rockstar? There is a strange phenomenon in the video game industry that has puzzled analysts, competitors, and even Rockstar's own rival for the better part of 2 decades. No matter how much money is thrown at the problem, no matter how many talented studios try to copy the formula, nobody has managed to build something that genuinely rivals Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption. Open-world crime games, cinematic sandboxes, satirical American epics. Dozens of studios have tried. Sucker Punch, Ubisoft Montreal, Volition, CD Projekt Red, Square Enix. Even massive publishers with unlimited budgets have all released games that borrow liberally from Rockstar's playbook. And yet, when the dust settles, Rockstar is still standing alone at the top of the mountain. Untouched, its games still selling tens of millions of copies years, sometimes over a decade after release. This is not an accident. It is not simply better writing or bigger budgets, although both of those things are part of the story. What Rockstar has built is closer to an entire ecosystem of competitive advantages that reinforce each other. Patience is a business philosophy, a culture of near-obsessive craftsmanship, technological infrastructure that took decades to mature, a marketing approach built on scarcity and mystique rather than noise, and, perhaps most importantly, an institutional willingness to disappoint shareholders and fans in the short term for the sake of long-term dominance. This is the story of why Rockstar occupies a category of its own, and why the gap between Rockstar and everyone else keeps widening instead of closing. The myth of the easy open world. To understand why nobody is caught up to Rockstar, you first have to understand the myth that makes so many competitors fail in the first place. The idea that an open-world game is simply a checklist of features. Studios look at Grand Theft Auto 5 or Red Dead Redemption 2 and see a big map, dozens of side activities, a branching crime story, some vehicles, some shooting mechanics, and multiplayer bolted on top. From a distance, it looks replicable. Hire enough developers, license a capable engine, greenlight a big enough budget, and in theory, you should be able to produce something in the same weight class. This is precisely the trap that has swallowed studio after studio. Games like Watch Dogs, Saints Row, Sleeping Dogs, Mafia 3, and dozens of others have attempted to hit the same beats. Open city, crime story, side missions, vehicles, and while some of them found commercial success or cult followings, none of them managed to create the same sense of a living, breathing world that people want to return to years later. The reason is that an open world is not a checklist. It is closer to a symphony where thousands of small systemic decisions, how pedestrians react to violence, how the physics of a car crash feels, how a mission fails gracefully instead of punishingly, how the weather changes the mood of a scene, have to be tuned in relation to one another. Rockstar didn't discover this formula overnight. They built it incrementally, game after game, over more than 25 years, refining tools and design philosophy each time. Competitors trying to build a GTA killer in 3 or 4 years are essentially trying to skip 2.5 decades of institutional learning, and it shows in the final product every single time. A quarter century of compounding craft. Rockstar's origin traces back to 1998, when the company released the original Grand Theft Auto, a top-down, comparatively crude game that nonetheless captured something raw and provocative. The idea that a video game could let you be the villain in a satirical, systemic city, rather than a hero following a linear script. That kernel of an idea, freedom plus consequence plus dark humor, has been the through line of every Rockstar release since, from Vice City to San Andreas, from GTA 4 to GTA 5, from the underrated bully to the genre-redefining Red Dead Redemption series. What makes this history so important isn't nostalgia. It's compounding. Every Rockstar title has functioned as a stepping stone toward the next one, with lessons about mission design, AI behavior, world density, narrative pacing, and technology feeding directly into the next project. Grand Theft Auto 3 essentially invented the modern 3D open-world action game in 2001. Vice City proved that Rockstar could nail atmosphere and licensed music as a storytelling device. San Andreas proved they could build an absurdly large, varied map filled with distinct regions without losing coherence. GTA 4 proved they could tell a more grounded, tragic immigrant story while pushing physics and AI simulation further than any competitor had attempted. Red Dead Redemption proved the open-world formula could work outside of a modern city in a slower, more melancholic register. GTA 5 proved they could juggle three protagonists and merge single-player storytelling with an evolving, live-service multiplayer economy. And Red Dead Redemption 2 arguably represents the high-water mark of the entire genre. A game so dense with systemic detail, realistic horse testicles shrinking in cold, weather being the meme-iffy tip of an enormous iceberg, that competitors are still trying to figure out how it was even possible to ship. Each of these games represents years of iteration on tools, technology, and creative philosophy that never gets thrown away. Competing studios, by contrast, are usually building from something closer to zero or from an engine and design philosophy borrowed from a genre that isn't quite suited to the kind of game they're trying to make. This structural head start is one of the most underappreciated reasons nobody can catch up. Rockstar's fifth or sixth attempt at solving a particular design problem is being compared against a competitor's very first attempt at solving it. Patience as a competitive weapon. If there is one word that defines Rockstar's philosophy more than any other, it is patience, a virtue that is almost entirely absent from the rest of the games industry, where quarterly earnings calls and annual release cadences dictate almost every major creative decision. Rockstar has never operated on an annual or even biennial release schedule for its flagship titles. Grand Theft Auto V released in September 2013. Grand Theft Auto VI, after multiple delays, is now scheduled for November 19, 2026, more than 13 years later. Red Dead Redemption 2 released in 2018, 6 years after the first Red Dead Redemption, and 8 years before that gap would close with any true successor on the horizon. In an industry where publishers like Ubisoft or EA release annualized franchises, a new Assassin's Creed almost every year, a new FIFA or Madden every single year without fail, Rockstar's willingness to let a game simply not exist for over a decade is almost unthinkable from a shareholder's perspective. And yet this patience is precisely why the games hit as hard as they do when they finally arrive. Every additional year of development is another year that engineers can spend refining animation systems, another year that writers can spend workshopping dialogue, another year that level designers can spend making a city block feel authentic rather than generic. Competing studios operating on tighter cycles simply do not have this luxury. A game studio owned by a publicly traded company with quarterly targets to hit cannot tell its board, "We need 3 more years," without enormous internal and external pressure. Rockstar, backed by a parent company in Take-Two Interactive that has learned, sometimes through painful trial and error, that a Rockstar delay is not a failure, but an investment, has built one of the only environments in the AAA industry where a team can genuinely say it's not ready yet, and have that be respected rather than punished. This dynamic played out in real time with Grand Theft Auto VI itself. The game was originally rumored and informally expected to hit a 2025 launch window. Rockstar then confirmed a delay to spring 2026, and later pushed the release again to November 19, 2026, citing the need for additional polish. For almost any other studio, a second public delay of this magnitude would be treated by the media and by fans as a crisis, a sign of mismanagement or trouble in development. For Rockstar, it was treated by most of its audience with something closer to relief and increased anticipation, an implicit trust that if Rockstar says the game needs more time, the game needs more time, and the wait will be worth it. That kind of consumer trust is not something you can buy with a marketing budget. It has to be earned over decades, and Rockstar is one of a vanishingly small number of studios on Earth that has actually earned it. The cult of secrecy and the power of silence. While most of the games industry has embraced an always-on marketing strategy, trailers, teaser trailers for trailers, developer diaries, influencer previews, leaked gameplay clips, constant Twitter and Discord engagement, Rockstar has gone almost entirely in the opposite direction and has become one of their most powerful competitive tools. Consider the marketing arc of Grand Theft Auto 6. The first trailer dropped in December 2023 after years of speculation and leaks, and it became one of the most watched entertainment trailers in internet history within days. And then, largely, silence. A second trailer arrived in May 2025. Beyond that, Rockstar has stayed extraordinarily tight-lipped, revealing only a release date, 2 launch platforms, the names of the 2 protagonists, Jason and Lucia, and the Florida-inspired setting of Leonida built around a reimagined Vice City. No constant drip feed of gameplay clips. No influencer junkets months in advance. No extended Inside the Studio documentary series explaining every design decision before the game is even in players' hands. This scarcity is deliberate, and it is deeply countercultural in an industry that has largely convinced itself that visibility equals sales. Most publishers believe that if you are not constantly reminding the audience that your game exists, interest will evaporate. Rockstar has proven repeatedly that the opposite can be true. When information about a game is rare, every single piece of information becomes an event. A 90-second trailer becomes a worldwide news story analyzed frame by millions of fans for months. Pre-orders, once they finally open, as they did for GTA 6 on June 25, 2026, become a stampede rather than a routine transaction, with physical retail copies reportedly selling out within roughly an hour on major platforms. Competing studios have tried to mimic scarcity marketing before, but it rarely works for a simple reason. Scarcity marketing only functions when the underlying product has already earned a level of trust and anticipation that silence won't kill. If a lesser-known studio goes quiet for 2 years, most of the potential audience simply forgets the game exists or assumes it has been canceled. Rockstar can afford silence because its games have already proven, generation after generation, that the wait is worth it. This is the flip side of the patience argument. The same trust that lets Rockstar delay a game without backlash is the trust that lets Rockstar market a game by saying almost nothing at all. Technology built for exactly one purpose. Underpinning all of this creative and business philosophy is an enormous, often invisible technological advantage. Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or Rage, along with the internal tools built around it over nearly 2 decades. Unlike most competitors who license a general-purpose engine, such as Unreal Engine or Unity, and then attempt to bend it toward the specific needs of a massive, systemic open world, Rockstar has spent since the mid-2000s building and refining an engine designed from the ground up for exactly one kind of game. Dense, physics-heavy, narratively driven open worlds with enormous numbers of simultaneously simulated characters, vehicles, and environmental systems. This matters more than it might initially seem. A general-purpose engine is, by definition, a series of compromises built to be flexible enough to make a puzzle platformer, a first-person shooter, or a strategy game, none of which requires the specific kind of simulation-heavy architecture that a Rockstar open world needs. When a studio licenses Unreal Engine to build their own GTA-style game, they are frequently fighting the engine itself, hacking around limitations that were never designed with their specific use case in mind. Rockstar, by contrast, is not fighting its own tools. Rage has been shaped and reshaped by the exact same design problems Rockstar keeps trying to solve. Better crowd simulation, better vehicle physics, better weather systems, better facial animation, better ragdoll physics. Which means each new game benefits from literally decades of engine-level problem solving that no external studio has access to. This technological compounding effect is invisible to most players, but it shows up constantly in the small details that make Rockstar worlds feel more alive than their competitors. The way NPCs in Red Dead Redemption 2 remember an altercation with the player and react differently days later. The way a city block in Grand Theft Auto 5 has multiple layers of ambient behavior happening simultaneously without ever feeling scripted. The way weather, lighting, and physics interact believably rather than as disconnected systems bolted together. None of that comes from hiring more animators. It comes from a 2-decade-old, purpose-built foundation that competitors simply do not have the time, resources, or institutional history to replicate from scratch. writing that refuses to condescend. A technological and business advantage only gets a studio so far if the actual content isn't good. What separates Rockstar from nearly every other studio attempting satirical or crime-driven storytelling is a level of writing discipline that treats its audience as intelligent adults capable of parsing irony, moral ambiguity, and social commentary, rather than needing everything explained to them. Grand Theft Auto has always functioned as a dark mirror held up to American culture. Consumerism, media saturation, celebrity worship, corporate hypocrisy, political theater, filtered through the perspective of characters who are rarely straightforwardly heroic. The games do not ask you to like their protagonists in a conventional sense. They ask you to understand them, to see the systems of poverty, ambition, and violence that produce them, while never fully excusing the harm those characters cause. Red Dead Redemption 2 pushes this even further, structuring an entire game around the slow, tragic collapse of an outlaw gang that both viewers and the player character eventually recognize as a doomed, self-destructive fantasy of freedom in a world that has already moved past it. Most competitors attempting the crime satire genre tend to flatten this complexity into either straightforward power fantasy, you're cool, you're strong, the world exists to be dominated, or into shallow, winking self-awareness that never actually commits to saying anything. Saints Row, for example, evolved over its sequels into increasingly cartoonish self-parody, which is a legitimate creative choice, but one that sacrifices the emotional weight that makes Rockstar's worlds linger in players' minds for years. Watch Dogs attempted social commentary about surveillance and technology, but rarely let that commentary breathe without an action set piece interrupting it. Rockstar's writers, many of whom have worked together across multiple console generations, have developed a shared sensibility for tone, pacing, and character work that is exceptionally difficult to replicate without that same accumulated experience working together. The illusion of a living world. One of the single hardest things to fake in game design is the sense that a world exists independently of the player, that pedestrians have destinations, that traffic follows internal logic, that a random encounter in the wilderness feels discovered rather than triggered. Rockstar has spent literal decades refining what game designers call systemic density, the layering of dozens of interlocking simulation systems that together produce the illusion of an organic, unscripted world. In Red Dead Redemption 2, this manifests in ways that became famous well beyond the game's core audience. Strangers on the road who might rob you, might ask for help, might simply comment on the weather and move on. Horses whose coats respond to temperature and terrain. A wanted system that dynamically tracks witnesses rather than simply triggering when a scripted trigger volume is crossed. None of these individual systems are in isolation revolutionary. Plenty of games have basic weather effects or basic NPC schedules. What makes Rockstar's version different is the sheer number of these systems running simultaneously and interacting with one another in ways that were clearly tested and refined obsessively rather than shipped as a single, isolated feature. This is precisely the kind of work that is almost impossible to shortcut. You cannot outsource a world that feels alive to a marketing department or solve it with a bigger budget alone. It requires the accumulated tuning of hundreds of interacting variables by teams who have done this exact kind of work multiple times before, learning from the failures of the previous game. Competing studios frequently ship worlds that look impressively large and detailed in screenshots and trailers, but feel hollow the moment a player spends more than a few hours moving through them, because the underlying systemic density simply isn't there. The business machine behind the curtain. It would be a mistake to treat Rockstar's dominance as a purely creative phenomenon, divorced from the business reality that makes this level of ambition financially possible in the first place. Grand Theft Auto Online, launched alongside Grand Theft Auto 5 in 2013, transformed Rockstar's business model in a way that continues to fund the studio's uniquely patient approach to single-player development more than a decade later. GTA Online became, almost accidentally, one of the most consistently profitable pieces of entertainment software ever created, generating billions of dollars in recurring revenue through the sale of in-game currency, vehicles, properties, and content updates released continuously over the course of more than a decade. This ongoing revenue stream gave Rockstar and its parent company, Take-Two Interactive, an extraordinary luxury that almost no other studio in the industry enjoys: the ability to fund years of additional development on the next single-player flagship title without being financially desperate for its release. Most studios cannot afford to delay a game twice, because doing so threatens the company's ability to make payroll or satisfy investors. Rockstar can afford to delay Grand Theft Auto 6 because Grand Theft Auto Online is still, more than a decade after its original launch, generating enormous recurring revenue in the background. This creates a virtuous cycle that competitors structurally cannot replicate quickly. A live-service revenue engine of GTA Online scale took years to build and refine, and it was made possible in the first place by the enormous goodwill and player trust generated by Grand Theft Auto V's single-player campaign. Studios that attempt to build a live-service game first, hoping it will eventually fund an ambitious single-player follow-up, almost always struggle, because that trust and audience size has to be earned through quality single-player experiences first. Rockstar essentially built the single most successful live-service side business in the industry as a byproduct of already being the best in the world at single-player, story-driven open-world design. And now that side business is what allows the studio's next flagship project the financial runway to take over a decade to complete. Why competitors keep failing in the same ways? Looking across the industry's many attempts to challenge Rockstar's dominance, a pattern emerges. Competitors tend to fail for structural reasons that have very little to do with talent and almost everything to do with incentives, timelines, and institutional history. Publicly traded publishers with annualized release schedules cannot replicate Rockstar's patience because their entire business model depends on predictable, frequent releases to satisfy shareholders. Smaller independent or mid-sized studios cannot replicate Rockstar's technological infrastructure because building a purpose-built engine over multiple console generations requires resources and time that only a handful of companies on Earth possess. Studios chasing quick cultural relevance by imitating GTA's tone often misunderstand that the satire only works because it's grounded in painstaking systemic realism. Take away the systemic density, and the satire reads as shallow rather than cutting. And studios that try to build a live-service economy before establishing single-player trust tend to alienate the very audience they need in order to succeed, because players can tell the difference between a game designed around genuine creative ambition and one designed primarily around monetization. Even studios with massive talent and resources have run into this wall. CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk 2077 arrived with extraordinary ambition and, eventually, after years of post-launch repair work, became a genuinely excellent game. But its launch date demonstrated exactly how difficult it is to ship a Rockstar-caliber open world on anything less than a Rockstar-linked development timeline, even with a team that had already proven itself with The Witcher 3. Ubisoft's various open-world franchises, despite enormous budgets and years of iteration, have consistently struggled to escape a reputation for formulaic map design. Icon-cluttered worlds that prioritize quantity of activities over the systemic depth that makes a Rockstar map feel worth exploring on its own terms. Volition's Saints Row reboot, released in 2022, attempted to modernize the crime sandbox formula, but was hampered by a compressed development timeline and ultimately failed to find the audience or critical reception the studio needed, contributing to the studio's closure the following year. A stark illustration of just how unforgiving this genre is for anyone operating without Rockstar's financial and creative runway. The human cost behind the craft. No honest account of Rockstar's dominance can ignore the significant controversy that has followed the studio for years regarding its internal working culture, particularly the use of extended crunch, mandatory or heavily pressured overtime, during the final stretches of major game development. Reporting around the development of Red Dead Redemption 2, in particular, brought renewed public scrutiny to Rockstar's internal practices, with numerous accounts describing extremely long working hours during the game's final development phases. This is an important and uncomfortable part of the story, because it complicates any narrative that frames Rockstar's patience purely as an unambiguous virtue. The studio's willingness to spend a decade or more perfecting a single game has, according to numerous reports over the years, come at a real human cost to the developers, artists, and engineers producing that work, particularly during the last year or two of any given project when deadlines finally tighten. Rockstar has stated publicly that it has worked to change its internal culture and reduce reliance on crunch in more recent years, and there is no way for an outside observer to fully verify the current state of internal working conditions at the studio. What can be said is that the industry-wide conversation about crunch, sustainable working conditions, and the human cost of chasing this level of polish has been shaped significantly by scrutiny of Rockstar's own history, and that any full accounting of why Rockstar's games are so meticulously crafted has to include an honest acknowledgement of the labor and the reported personal toll on some of that labor that goes into achieving it. Scale is both blessing and trap. Rockstar's success also creates a paradox that makes it even harder for competitors to close the gap. The bigger and more successful Rockstar's games become, the higher the bar rises for what counts as an acceptable follow-up, and the more resources Rockstar itself has to keep raising that bar further. Grand Theft Auto V is, by most estimates, one of the best-selling entertainment products of any kind in history, having sold well over 200 million copies across multiple console generations in the years since its 2013 release. That level of commercial success gives Rockstar leverage that essentially no other studio possesses. The ability to say no to a rushed release, the ability to fund a genuinely enormous development team for the better part of a decade, and the ability to walk away from a launch date that doesn't feel ready without existential financial risk. This creates a snowball effect. Because GTA 5 made an extraordinary amount of money over an extraordinarily long tail, still generating significant sales and GTA Online revenue more than a decade after its original release. Rockstar has been able to build an even larger, more ambitious team and budget for Grand Theft Auto 6, which will in turn set an even higher bar for scale and polish, which will in turn generate even more resources for whatever comes after it. Competitors are not just trying to catch up to where Rockstar is today. They're trying to catch up to a moving target that has more resources and more accumulated expertise with every single release. The commercial expectations around Grand Theft Auto 6 illustrate this vividly, with a development budget widely estimated by industry analysts to run into the billions of dollars, and Take-Two Interactive's own financial guidance built substantially around the game's performance. GTA 6 represents a scale of investment that very few companies on the planet could respond to, let alone match. The weight of expectation. Part of what makes Rockstar's position so unusual is the sheer scale of cultural expectation now surrounding anything the studio releases. When the first Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer premiered in December 2023, it became one of the most viewed non-music videos in YouTube history within its first day, a level of instantaneous cultural saturation that essentially no other video game announcement has matched. That kind of anticipation is itself both an asset and an enormous burden. On one hand, it guarantees a launch event unlike almost anything else in entertainment. Pre-orders for the game reportedly saw immediate, overwhelming demand once they finally opened in June 2026, with physical retail editions selling out within roughly an hour on major platforms and PlayStation 5 pre-orders reportedly far outpacing Xbox. On the other hand, it means Rockstar is now competing not merely against other studios, but against the impossibly inflated expectations generated by its own marketing silence and its own past achievements. This is, in a strange way, the ultimate proof of the argument this piece has been making. Nobody can beat Rockstar because Rockstar's primary competitor at this point is itself. Other studios are not seriously expected, by critics, by players, or by the industry press, to produce something that will outsell or outshine Grand Theft Auto 6 on release. The conversation across gaming media and online communities in the run-up to its release has repeatedly centered not on whether a rival game might overshadow it, but on whether other major publishers should simply avoid releasing their own big titles anywhere near Rockstar's launch window at all. treating a Rockstar release date less like a competitor's product launch and more like a scheduling hazard to be worked around, the way a smaller film studio might avoid opening a movie the same weekend as a new entry in a massive blockbuster franchise. Craft over trend chasing. One of the more subtle reasons Rockstar has maintained its position is a stubborn refusal to chase short-term industry trends the way many competitors do. In an era where battle royale modes, live service monetization loops, seasonal content calendars, and always online requirements have become nearly mandatory features across the AAA industry, Rockstar has largely built its flagship single-player experiences as complete, self-contained works of narrative craftsmanship first, with online components developed as a genuinely separate, carefully considered layer rather than a mandatory bolt-on designed purely to extend playtime metrics. This has allowed Rockstar's core single-player games to remain focused and coherent in a way that many trend-chasing competitors cannot match, because those competitors are frequently designing their single-player campaigns with one eye on how the mechanics, structures, and narrative beats can be repurposed to support a live service economy from day one. That divided attention shows up in the final product. Missions that feel engineered to teach the player systems they'll need for a multiplayer mode rather than serving the story being told. Worlds built around repeatable activity loops rather than narrative pacing. Characters designed to be customizable avatars rather than fully realized people with their own arcs. Rockstar's decision to largely keep these concerns separate, building GTA Online as its own distinct universe rather than forcing GTA V Story Mode to serve double duty as a live service tutorial, has protected the integrity of its single-player storytelling in a way that has become increasingly rare across the rest of the industry. The impossible standard of Red Dead Redemption 2. It's worth pausing specifically on Red Dead Redemption 2, because it represents perhaps the clearest single example of why the gap between Rockstar and its competitors has become almost impossible to close. Released in 2018 after 8 years of development, the game is frequently cited by critics, developers, and players alike as one of the most detailed, systemically rich, and emotionally devastating pieces of interactive storytelling ever produced. Its reputation has only grown in the years since release, with the game continuing to top greatest games of all time lists well into the following decade. What makes Red Dead Redemption 2 such a difficult standard to match is not any single feature, but the sheer, almost unreasonable density of care applied across every layer of the game simultaneously, from the geologically accurate rock formations across its vast map, to the way individual animal species have distinct, realistic behaviors and can be tracked, hunted, and skinned with an attention to detail bordering on obsessive, to a lead performance and motion capture animation for protagonist Arthur Morgan that remains one of the most acclaimed character performances in the medium's history, to a slow-burn narrative structure that deliberately frustrates traditional pacing expectations in service of a more mournful, literary tone. Very few studios in the world have the combination of financial backing, technical infrastructure, and institutional patience required to even attempt a project of this scope, and fewer still have the sustained creative discipline to execute it without the seams showing. Red Dead Redemption 2 functions almost as a permanent reminder to the rest of the industry of exactly how high the ceiling for this genre actually is, and exactly how far below that ceiling most competitors, even well-funded and well-intentioned ones, still operate. What Grand Theft Auto 6 represents. As of mid-2026, Grand Theft Auto 6 stands as the clearest test yet of whether Rockstar's formula can continue to work at an even larger scale than before. The game is confirmed to launch on November 19th, 2026, exclusively on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X/S, following 2 publicly announced delays from its originally rumored 2025 window. It will be set in the fictional state of Leonida, built around a reimagined, modern Vice City, and will follow 2 protagonists, Jason and Lucia, in what early marketing has framed as a Bonnie and Clyde-inspired crime story. Pre-orders opened on June 25th, 2026, with a standard edition priced at $79.99 and an Ultimate Edition at $99.99, alongside a pre-order bonus pack for anyone purchasing before November 20th, 2026. Every piece of this rollout reflects the same underlying philosophy that has defined Rockstar for over 2 decades. Minimal information released on Rockstar's own timeline, rather than the industry's, a willingness to delay rather than compromise, and a level of consumer anticipation that dwarfs virtually anything else in the entertainment industry, video games or otherwise. Analysts have suggested the game could sell in the tens of millions of units within its opening days alone, a scale of launch that essentially no other entertainment product, film, television, or otherwise, has consistently matched in the modern era. Some industry watchers have gone so far as to suggest that other major publishers are already quietly steering their own late 2026 release dates away from Rockstar's November window entirely, treating the launch less as a competing product and more as an unavoidable seasonal event, similar to how smaller box office releases avoid opening against a major blockbuster. Can this model ever be broken? It's fair to ask whether Rockstar's dominance is truly permanent, or whether the very factors that have made the studio untouchable could eventually become liabilities. There are a few scenarios worth considering. The first is generational. Rockstar's leadership and key creative figures, many of whom have been with the studio since its earliest days, will not lead the company forever, and the institutional knowledge that has compounded over 25 years could, in theory, erode if that leadership transition is mishandled. The second is expectation itself. As each successive game is measured not against competitors, but against Rockstar's own prior achievements, the studio faces a uniquely difficult challenge in continuing to exceed a bar it keeps raising for itself, and any perceived misstep, whether creative, technical, or cultural, would be scrutinized far more harshly than an equivalent misstep from almost any other studio in the industry. The third is structural. As development budgets and timelines continue to grow into the billions of dollars and the better part of a decade, even Rockstar's compounding advantages face diminishing returns, and there may be a practical ceiling to how much bigger, denser, and more detailed a single open world can realistically become before the cost and time required no longer make commercial sense, even for a studio with Rockstar's resources. Still, betting against Rockstar has, for over 2 decades, been one of the more reliably losing propositions in the entertainment industry. Every generation of critics has predicted that the studio's next project would finally be the one where the ambition outpaced the execution, and time and again, Rockstar has instead redefined what the ceiling for the genre even looks like. Competing studios are not simply trying to build a better open-world crime game anymore. They're trying to outpatient a company that has built its entire identity around patience, outspend a company backed by one of the most successful recurring revenue engines in entertainment history, and outcraft a team with a quarter-century of compounding institutional expertise that no amount of fresh funding can instantly replicate. The talent magnet effect. There is one more structural advantage worth examining closely, because it explains why even studios that manage to poach individual former Rockstar developers rarely manage to replicate the studio's output. Rockstar functions as a talent magnet in a way that very few other companies in the industry can match. Being able to say, I worked on Red Dead Redemption 2, or I shipped Grand Theft Auto 5, carries a weight on a resume that few other credits in the industry can rival, which means Rockstar can be extraordinarily selective about who it hires, drawing from a global pool of artists, engineers, writers, and designers who specifically want to work at the one studio consistently associated with the highest ceiling of craft in the medium. This creates a reinforcing loop that compounds the same way the technology and business advantages do. The best environmental artists want to work somewhere their environmental art will be seen by tens of millions of players and held up as an industry benchmark. The best animators want to work on projects with the time and budget to get motion capture and facial performance right rather than good enough. The best writers want the freedom of a project schedule long enough to actually revise a script multiple times rather than lock dialogue 18 months before a rush ship date. Rockstar's reputation lets it recruit from the very top of each of these disciplines, and every project that succeeds reinforces that reputation further, making the next recruiting cycle even easier. Competing studios frequently hire former Rockstar developers in an attempt to import some of this expertise directly. And while individual hires can absolutely raise the quality bar of a given project, this approach usually runs into the same wall discussed earlier. A single transplanted senior developer cannot recreate an entire studio's accumulated pipeline, tools, and institutional muscle memory on their own. Craft of this kind lives not just in individual brilliant people, but in the shared processes, feedback loops, and quality bars that an entire organization has internalized together over many years and many ship projects. You can hire away a handful of veterans, but you cannot hire away 25 years of an organization learning, as a whole, exactly how it wants to build a mission, calibrate a gunfight, or block out a cutscene. The absence of a true rival genre-wide. It is also worth stepping back and asking a broader question. Has any other studio, in any other genre, achieved a comparable level of category dominance to what Rockstar has achieved in the open-world crime and Western space? The comparison is instructive. In the Souls-like genre, From Software has faced credible, well-regarded competition from studios producing games that, while distinct, sit comfortably in the same conversation about quality and influence. In the survival crafting genre, dozens of studios have released commercially successful, critically respected titles without any single company establishing the kind of runaway dominance Rockstar enjoys. Even in genres with a clear market leader, first-person shooters, for instance, where Call of Duty has long dominated commercially, there remains a robust ecosystem of critically acclaimed rivals occupying meaningfully similar creative and commercial territory. Rockstar's position in the open-world crime and Western genre is unusual precisely because that level of competitive vacuum simply does not exist elsewhere in this specific space. There is no credible second-place finisher that critics and players consistently discuss in the same breath as Grand Theft Auto or Red Dead Redemption, in a way that, say, The Last of Us and God of War might be discussed alongside one another as peers in prestige, cinematic single-player storytelling. This isn't because other studios haven't tried. Plenty have, as this piece has already detailed, but because the specific combination of factors required to compete at this level, technological infrastructure built over decades, financial patience backed by an enormous live-service revenue stream, a talent pipeline that only success on this scale can attract, and a marketing philosophy built on scarcity that only pre-existing trust can sustain, is not something that can be assembled quickly by even the most well-resourced competitor. It has to be built brick by brick, project by project, disappointment by disappointment, over the better part of a generation. Rockstar is simply the only studio on Earth that has actually done it. Nobody can beat Rockstar, at least not yet. Not because the rest of the industry lacks talent, ambition, or resources, but because Rockstar has spent over 25 years building a self-reinforcing system where each advantage feeds every other advantage. Technological infrastructure built specifically for this genre lets the studio execute ideas that would break a general-purpose engine. Financial patience, funded by one of the most successful live-service economies ever built, lets the studio delay a release without existential risk. A culture of near-obsessive craftsmanship, refined across multiple console generations, produces worlds so systemically dense that competitors working on tighter timelines simply cannot replicate the illusion of a living, breathing place. A marketing philosophy built on scarcity rather than saturation turns silence itself into an asset, generating more anticipation than any amount of constant promotion could achieve. And underlying all of it is a level of institutional trust with its audience, earned game after game across more than 2 decades, that allows Rockstar to say it's not ready yet and have millions of people simply wait rather than move on. None of this comes without real costs. The industry's ongoing reckoning with crunch culture and sustainable working conditions owes much of its urgency to scrutiny of Rockstar's own history, and it would be a mistake to romanticize the human labor behind this level of polish as if it were achieved without difficulty or sacrifice for the people actually building these games. But as a pure competitive phenomenon, Rockstar's position remains almost unprecedented in the modern entertainment industry. A studio that releases new flagship titles once a decade or less, that says almost nothing about those titles until it is ready, that regularly disappoints its own release timelines without losing its audience's trust, and that somehow, every single time, delivers something that resets the ceiling for what an open world can be. As Grand Theft Auto 6 approaches its November 2026 launch, carrying with it a level of anticipation that no other entertainment product on the planet currently commands, it's worth remembering that this moment, the 10-plus years of silence, the delays, the single trailer analyzed frame by frame for years, is not an accident or a side effect of Rockstar's success. It is the strategy itself, refined over a quarter century, and it is precisely why nobody has been able to touch them yet.